He was a well-known philosopher of that era, and he wrote a book called Time and Being. And being is very important because it's important to me because I wrote that book. I mean that book over there. Thank you. Life as Ken Turner, or life being Ken Turner. So that being here is me being myself. I step outside myself and I see my being there, so I step into it. And that book is about all my being, and my paintings, and my philosophy. So I wrote that. That's recently published in 2023. It's the third edition, so it was published before that. But this was published in 1954. And it's the first book I wrote about myself, Crushing Culture, because I love crushing culture. And I'm a bit like Herbert Reed, who said, to hell with culture in his book. If anybody knows about Herbert Reed. So, to hell with culture, because culture is dead, is a disaster. Today our culture is a disaster because it's based on economics and greed. We all know about that, don't we? I mean, seriously, it's so when I crushed culture, I left the art galleries in London. I had 3 shows, and they're in this book. This book on Amazon is £84. Isn't that awful? £84! But you can get it on the internet free. You can download it. And some of the illustrations are upside down and inside out and all sorts of things, but you get the gist of what I'm saying in this book, Crushing Culture. And the way I crushed it was to go out into the streets and put these things into the environment, right? Large inflatables into neighbourhood areas. And here, and I called it Action Space. All action. Hello. Sit down. Yeah, so that's in this book. That's how I learnt how to perform, which I'm doing now. Okay, because it was essential to defend these inflatables because they were vulnerable to knife attacks because the skinheads at that time used to say, "Oh, look, balloons! We'll puncture that." So, so they punctured it, and we came along as characters. So we said, "Oh, we'll have to be somebody else. We can't just be ourselves." As artists and dancers and theatre people and musicians, as the whole group was. And so we adopted characters. So we began to perform. And that scared everybody, because we weren't human. And I learned to perform too. My last show was at the Serpentine. And so I haven't got slides, so that's the Serpentine, outside the Serpentine in the garden. And Sue Grayson, who was the curator at the time of that gallery, was very anxious that art should be more accessible to people and should go into the streets and parks and schools and adventure playgrounds. So I think I don't want to talk more about this, but I want to get back to the object. So the first person to talk about the object was Martin Heidegger, and he talked about the hammer. When you look at a hammer, you look at its appearance. You may think about its function, because it's, as Heidegger said, it's ready to hammer. Okay, it's there, ready to hammer. But it's more than that, isn't it? The metal, the plastic handle, where does it come from? So it has a history. So it has, in fact, I think when you look at the hammer, and I look at the hammer, as an artist, I see it as a living hammer. It begins to live. And it has a function, yes, but it's more than its function. It lives in its form, in its aesthetic form. And while we're talking about aesthetics, a book I value very much here. Friedrich Schiller wrote this book in 1795. 1795, on the aesthetic education of man. So when you, I can boil all his, there are 27 letters to a prince in Denmark, so they were published later, and he had fine sensibilities, very fine sensibilities about the idea of the aesthetic. That the aesthetic education of man was very important. Otherwise, man destroys, or we destroys ourselves and the planet. So today that's happening. And one of his main statements, which I can hopefully find here, I haven't got my glasses on, is that I'll just talk about it, because his aesthetic, his idea of aesthetic, is it rules everything over moral judgments. If you make a moral judgment without an aesthetic form, you're done for. You're just kind of daydreaming, or it's not vital. It's not real. It's not reality itself, and it's not a living thing. So the aesthetic that he talks about is about form. Like form in the canvas, it's easy to see. It has a form, otherwise it wouldn't exist. But everything has a form. You have a form as an audience. You're also an object. Every one of you together, you're an object as a group of individuals. And that's important, but I've got to go beyond that object with a moral understanding as well, with a moral judgment. And that's important, because if you look at what's happening in politics today, is that there's no aesthetics in the politics. There's no real form. There's just stabs at some kind of reality or future structure, and it's meaningless in the end, and it fails every time. Fails every time. Another book. I read a lot. My library is extensive. This Alfred North Whitehead was a philosopher, adventurer of ideas, a philosopher that was read by Heidegger and a lot of other philosophers, even Derrida. And he talks about feeling. There is a quote somewhere that I've listed here. Yes. It is a mistake to suppose that at the level of human intellect, the role of mental functioning is to add subtlety to the content of experience. Yet the exact opposite is the case. Mentality is an agent of simplification, and for this reason, appearance is an it's incredibly simplified edition of reality. So do you get that? So this comes in with appearance and links up with what I've said before. So you get, so he talks about feeling, and he talks about the aesthetic. But it's all about getting into something more than what is there as appears in the first instant. So the hammer. So we have to get into that. How? Right. Where are we? Oh, yeah. Hammer on a cup. Hammer on a cup. Right? That is an object. It has form. It has an aesthetic. It has meaning. It has a life. It has a life, it has a past, it has a future, like all of us. So that is as important as a human being. So is that. Now, this is my trick. Wait for it. What happens when the hammer meets the cup?
Depends how hard.
It's bone china. You can see through it a bit in the light. But it's very delicate. If I drop it, it'll break. But I'll break it in another way. There's a meeting of the hammer and the cup. There it is. This is the theatre, right? What happened then? This was an object, this was an object, that is an object. The object there, which you witnessed, is the experience. So experience is an object. It is an object. Any experience you look at, or feel rather, experience is an object. So that can be looked into. Your feeling, your imagination, your past, your future is all there. And this cup, I think it's amazing, you know, that action, two things coming together produce an event, a theatrical event, but it's an experience, and it's a reality, and it's an emotion. Now, there's a philosopher in America teaching architectural students how to see, what to look at and what happens when you look at something. But he devised, I haven't got the book here, but he devised a way. He's written many books. And he's in the University of Chicago, I think, teaching architects to see, which is very important because often they don't know how to see. I taught in the Architectural Association for 3 years to teach them something about visual education, which I thought was very important. But the principal threw me out and said, "You're not teaching architecture." I said, "No, I told you when you engaged me, I was an artist, Why you would employ me, I haven't got the faintest idea, except my idea is to educate architects visually, you know, to get their minds and their eyes looking properly at things, and the proportion of things, the aesthetic of things, in movement, and proportion in space and everything. So for 3 years I taught them how to perform in space, to draw and to paint, not architecture. But I had a companion who taught architecture when I wasn't there, so that was okay. I thought, you know, that's... Hello, how are you? You all right? Yeah, okay. Anyway, back to Graham Harman and his idea of the object and going beyond the object, which I've just demonstrated here. You can go beyond that top now because there was an experience that you all had, and it's an object, the experience is an object, so that hold that tight. That is incredibly important. So Graham Harman named his idea of the object, he named it O, 3 O's, object-oriented ontology. So the ontology was about the object, and where, you know, how the object lives. The object lives. It lives without human contact. A hammer, a cup. Now this cup is different. It's been through an experience. It has an aesthetic form, but a new one, which is interesting. But its relationship to the hammer has been an experience. Both of them experienced it. Because this one is living and that's living. So it's getting into your heads, or into my head, the idea of objects live. A chair lives. It's not just a chair, it's a living chair. It meets another chair, changes that chair because they meet. And that changes, but it can only change in one's mind. Does it change outside the mind? Yes, it does. And that's the important part of the philosophy of object-oriented ontology. He's written several books about the object, so you can look him up, Graham Harman, H-A-R-M-A-N, and for me he's fascinating because it carries on from Heidegger, and before Heidegger there were other philosophers who were talking about objects being alive. When you think about objects being alive, it brings the world alive. Everything is different. It's like going to a foreign country and you say, oh, it's lovely driving down here, walking down here. You notice the trees, you notice the landscape, they're much more vividly. So you're looking at the life of those trees and landscape. And so you can get nearer to them. But there's one important aspect of this philosophy that I find intriguing. You can only go so far into the object. The object resists. But it resists because it recedes. You can't catch up with it because it's going further and further away from you. So that's important because that's the excitement. that's a tension of life, you know, the dynamic of life. If something is receding from you and you can't catch it, how marvellous that is. What a lovely state to be in. And that's what happens in a painting. See, I'll demonstrate. Shall I demonstrate the painting?
Yes,
And what
please.
happens when it recedes from you all the time and you're trying to catch hold of it? Okay. I mean, I've only skimmed the surface, really, of the object. So it needs a lot of reading, looking and thinking. And you have to be in the right state of mind, because you've got to understand that things actually live. Every inanimate object lives as much as a living organism. And that produces a world of excitement. Everything is moving, everything is life, everything is developing. Day to day to day, year to year to year, a stone will change. A drop of water will change. Everything changes. There's a change happening all the time because it's living. So, here's, it's not a blank canvas, but it's a canvas. And it's stitched together, interestingly, because I was a bit hard up for canvas, and I often stitch things together. And they produce an interesting, quite an interesting division of space in a canvas. So already, accidentally, this canvas was hanging around when I was throwing paint or powder colour, and produced these shapes here. And they are living because they're on this canvas and they make the canvas area work. They're not dead, they have a past and they have a future. So can I add to that? Can I make something live on it, which is more than the life it has at the moment? Definitely has a life, whichever way you look. So if you look at it that way, it says something about maybe a sky and a landscape there. If you look at it that way, the sky is bigger and it looks a bit more comfortable, and that is a landscape. It's living, but it needs to progress. It's not enough. It's not enough as a painting, because it's all accidental. But the accidental is very important also. Let's take another object. This is an object and has a history and it has a life of its own. That's important. So how is it going to work with me? I'll make it work, right? So in the object is paint, obviously, there. The paint is alive, but it's trapped in here. So it wants to live somewhere else. It wants to live, to grow. So there it is. It's growing. It changes the canvas. It has a life. Okay. So when I do that, I look at it and think, yes. It's something like, it suggests, it begins to, remember me talking about the paint telling me something, okay? Well, this is telling me something. So when you hold it up like that, it's coming out of space onto the ground. Literally, that's how you look at it. But is it enough? Minimally, yes. Maybe it is. So let's take something else, another colour. And same thing happens, it's a paint inside here is imprisoned, dying to get out. So let's release it. Anybody want to go? Right. So, what does that do in the painting? There's now a conversation between that object and this object and this object. The object of space around here and the object of these two colours. So something has happened. But is it enough? For me, the artist, to say, well, I can work on that. But I'm not saying that I can do something successfully with an audience. When in my studio, this is what I do. Not all day, you know. All day I'm throwing paint around. So I get messed up, you know. And it's quite fun to go in, but it's serious as well, you know. So I have this other object, imprisoned paint. Shall we release it? Yes! 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 Don't come out. You don't want to come out? There! Yes, you will! Come on!
He's saying no, Ken. It's got a knife.
Yeah.
Just not happy with your relationship.
What's it saying?
Standing you up, it's not happy with your relationship.
Yeah.
My relationship with this.
What's the pen saying now? It's pen saying no.
All right, come out in a different way. Come on.
No, you've got to listen to it, Ken. What's the pen saying?
Listen.
Listen to it. It's saying no.
Yes. There we are.
Right.
Coming. Yes. Now we have something interesting. I think it's a little more interesting. So then, when I do that, I begin to see something happening. So I can, the thing is to find a reality in the objects. This is going further into the objects, the objects becoming something. So it begins to live much more intensely. So it's already changing and living.
Do you find you start looking for a thought like now? I see a butterfly now. Is that? I see. Now you made those two little antennae.
You want to go?
Can if you all made different marks, it would turn into something else. So I'd have a go, but it's made something else. I mean, it's made a butterfly. But is that part of the process then? Your dialogue with it? Is that part of your dialogue with the paint to see what it suggests to you?
Yes, and if it doesn't work, if somehow it's not working,
Well, what do you mean by that, Ken? Not working?
then I don't know what these are for the moment. They could be another animal or so you sort of play around. Don't like that. So you begin to develop something, but you're losing some of this space around somehow. But you know, I'd have to go on in private to do that. It's difficult to make a painting with an audience.
Can I ask a question? Do you think that you could do that without reading Heidegger? I mean, is there a difference
Without
between...
Heidegger?
Yeah, but so if you take someone who never ever heard of what you just said, and completely ignorant about object, philosophy, it does the same sort of action on the canvas.
No,
That doesn't make any difference.
I don't forget Heidegger, but I don't remember him, but he's in me.
So, do you
It's
think...
my experience.
My question is, does it make any difference if you got that philosophy inside you, or if you haven't got it? Does it change the object, the fact that you've got the experience of reading the philosophy and see the world through the eyes of the philosophers, and all this research, intellectual research, doesn't make any difference the moment you start working on it?
It isn't research. I hate research. I hate the idea of research, because research means it's a mental attitude. You know, to look out facts and put them together. That's rubbish. That's not what the world is about. The world's about experience, and that experience being having an aesthetic form, like Schiller said. That what happens with your experience, it has an aesthetic form. That form begins to live, and it begins to live on here as a painting, but it can go into many directions because it's open to development, it's open to other kinds, it's open to your feelings, your imagination. That's incredibly important. You can't work without feeling, obviously. So this, it's a bit banal at the moment because it looks like a butterfly, but it could be a dragon, it could be anything. It could become something totally different.
But how does Heidegger and all the experience that you've had, and you described how important that thinking through your reading, all the things you've read, all the things that has informed your history and your objectness, how does all that then, how does
I don't know, it's a mystery.
But for you,
you're asking me
but it's,
to be more literal
no,
about
just
trying to explain how I work, how I live and so on. I don't, I live emotionally, hopefully. Everything I look at becomes real.
Okay, that's cool, but we just want to know, how does Heidegger fit into that process?
He fits in because I've read him, because I've experienced his reading, his writing.
So therefore, it's totally legitimate, therefore, if I hadn't read Heidegger, if I hadn't even heard of him, I could equally have a similar experience with paint and cups, because I interact with those materials in a equally legitimate way with or without Heidegger. So it's just it's up to the individual.
I appreciate
you don't
that.
need Heidegger, maybe he does, I don't, you may, doesn't matter. I think
That's what makes up the...
Simply put, you could say that one can make that first motion that first relationship with the canvas when he splashed his paint there, which wasn't obviously the first part of the relation, but the moment that he splashed that paint, that moment is the result of the sum total of his life till that time, and all the experience that he's absorbed.
Yeah, the example of the hammer and the cup is that if you choose any other moment of the hammer meeting another cup, the result of the accident of meeting a hammer meeting another is completely different. The pieces of the splinters of the cup, they're not going to be the same ever.
There's a randomness there.
In the same way, the accident of the paint on the canvas is never going to be the same.
There's a randomness there in the starting point, and then your consciousness, because I keep wanting to hear about consciousness. We're talking about these objects that have life. In the hammer, where's the consciousness? Where does that come in? Must be in the artist then. There's a aesthetic choice about making. But Ken, when you decide to make a brushstroke there or there, is that not an aesthetic choice?
Well, I'm interfering by that.
But that's conscious thought, surely.
Yeah.
Your aesthetic mind and everybody else's head, we may all decide to put the mark around.
Well, it's a combination. It begins to be a very complex adventure, right? My past experience, my knowledge, if you like, in the past that I've read many books, leading up, I mean the philosophers before Heidegger that I've read, and they all build up into what I am now. My whole being is in that experience of reading. The same as looking at paintings. You know, if I look at Goya or Picasso, they have an effect on me, and that effect is important to me. So you can say, well, that's my influence, it's from reading. Somebody said, sometimes they were in the same room. I had a computer, I was looking at a piece of writing by a philosopher, and I was reading it, and it was coming into me. It seemed to be very important. I switched off the computer and went straight into the studio and started painting.
Okay.
So it's a relationship between the reading, but the reading wasn't a literal kind of understanding or a matter of facts. It was an experience. So the reading made me think in my imagination something else. So I came out of myself. And I was then powerful enough to go into the studio and work. That's all. I mean, you know, this is written in 1933, and he talks a lot about, I mean, he's an amazing writer, very clear, about society. Oh dear. Oh dear! I'll let it go.
It's an experience.
The world of internet interfering with this discourse. So I mean, it's an amazing reading. You know, it is an adventure of ideas, as he titles it, and it really goes into society, how society is constructed, and how it has its failures. And also, there's another important. He recently died. I've forgotten his name now. I'm getting to the age when I forget. It's something like Lafort. So, but I've just reread one of his books, and he talks about the failures of civilization, humanity, and what it's doing to itself and what it's doing to the world. He talks about climate change as well, because he was alive.
Latour.
Hmm?
Latour.
Latour. Yeah. Latour, he's a sociologist, and he looks at people, he looks at societies, he looks at communities and how they work, and how they falter, how they make mistakes, and how politicians make mistakes. So is, you know, at the liberal economy that we're living at the moment is broken down many times. Everything fails. Whatever one, you know, prime minister, whatever the government tries to do, it fails. It's very interesting. It's a bit like a folk opera in a sense. For me, when I read the news, I think, oh, what's going to happen now? Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? So, yeah, somebody's going to say something about the refugees, and then something about to say something about Russia or China, and what they're saying is completely stupid. Whatever you know, they don't see the reality of what it is to be human. And I came across an interesting remark of a journalist, actually, who said, you know, the trouble with the gross national product is that the gross national product means everybody contributes to the wealth of the country. But they're unhappy. They're in their jobs. Vast numbers of people don't like their jobs. They do it because it makes a living, that's all. So it makes a living, but they're unhappy. So when they go on holiday or retire or something, you know, oh, glad that's over. So, I'm probably overstepping my mark, because people are good at heart, aren't they? I mean, the people are very nice and good. But really, they're in the wrong job. Mostly. Not you. He's the editor of the paper. Anyway, so what sort of job do you do?
I'm an engineer.
A what?
An engineer.
Engineer?
Yeah.
That sounds promising, doesn't it? You like it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So you're in the jobs that you like, you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So some people are not in a job they like. You know, that they vast. I mean, it's probably wrong of me to say, you know, a lot of people are in jobs that they hate, and they're only doing it because it brings in a wage, and that's the only thing that matters to them. And so they do the job, they don't go to art galleries, they don't listen to music, probably. That's what Latour talks about all the time. You know, the failure of a civilization to manage itself properly. Not only manage itself, but manage the earth. So there are two things, of the earth and people, humanity and the earth. And humanity is failing the earth.
Nevertheless, I do find it interesting that humanity thinks itself so good that it's in charge of the planet, rather than the fact that the planet's probably in charge of it. If the planet doesn't want us.
Yeah.
And the planet will carry on.
And if the planet would be regardless,
We'll be extinct.
little Lingula, which we use as a dating fossil in archaeology, that was there hundreds of millions, probably billions of years ago, will still survive even if we, rather than the planet, decides to have a nuclear winter.
Oh, if we blow ourselves
in the
up.
next week or two.
I mean, if AI gets any control of things and blows the whole earth up, something
we
will
don't
live.
need AI to do that.
Something will live somewhere. You know, some little ant or worm will live. Something will hide in all the mess that's going on. Like after the dinosaurs gone, you know, something happened. After millions of years.
Can I just try something on you that happens to me quite frequently? I've got a couple of very good friends One is a gate on the Roman road to down the Cliver Valley, which goes down to Goldellen. I don't know how long the gate's been there, but I made friends with it when I was working at a climbing centre nearby in the 1960s. And what is very special about this gate, and what I realised about the gate, is the intellect of the craftsman that made it. And that is because whenever you go through the gate, it closes itself. And as long as I've known my friend the gate, and whenever I return to see the gate, it always opens and it always closes without fail. And it's worked, you know, I've known it. When did I last see it? I probably last saw it about 10 years ago, and I probably first came across it in 1967. And the reason is from one very simple mechanism, is that there's a string and a weight, and when you open the gate, it pulls the string and the weight. Now, how simple is that? And that's kept that gate alive, you know, as long as I've known it. I don't know when it, you know, it was a very old gate when I knew it. And the other one is, well, I think about one of my kayaks, which I don't use anymore. But my shed is a similar one, which was made by a friend of mine who's now dead. And you'll appreciate this. Every time I'm doing a repair or something on that shed, I become very aware of how well the guy has done it in the first place, and what is superb. Very casual. I mean, he built it as a pig shed, really. The interesting thing about the life of the construction of these agricultural buildings, timber frame, plywood, and a bit of cement render, is that there are now houses in the millions in St Ives, you know, as you go up to the Cornish Arms, that were actually built in the same way. Just a couple of breeze blocks at ground level, then a timber frame, then some insulating in between the two walls, plasterboard on the inside, whatever they call it, way rock, it's sort of called, it's got initials now, on the outside, and a cement mat rendering. You know, you would swear it was a breeze block wall, but it's not. The only good thing about that is that maybe in the future people won't value them as some of our properly constructed buildings when they come to tear them down. But humanity being what it is, maybe they will be fighting to keep the damn things there. But it's that the way that a craftsman, and the same with an artist or a painting, the way the spirit of the way a job is done can be transmitted through that. In the same way. So that's more about things having their own spiritual existence, I suppose, rather than living. But there was, I forget the name, maybe Diano knows, he's a student of philosophy. There was one of the, I think he was one of the Enlightenment philosophers, that said that rock was the lowest form of life, which I thought was quite interesting. But when I read that, not all that long ago, I remember that a friend of mine, in my early climbing days, once wrote about the experience of the rock, how a rock would experience a climber. So, interesting. Yeah, I know where you're coming from.
No, I know a few rock climbers who feel the same about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Thank you.
Reading, you know, it is an adventure of ideas, as he titles it, and it really goes into society, how society is constructed, and how it has its failures. And also, there's another important. He recently died. I've forgotten his name now. I'm getting to the age when I forget. It's something like Le Four. So, but I've just reread one of his books, and he talks about the failures of civilization, humanity, and what it's doing to itself and what it's doing to the world. He talks about climate change as well, because he was alive.
Latour.
Hmm?
Latour.
Yeah. Latour he's a sociologist, and he looks at people, he looks at societies, he looks at communities and how they work, and how they falter, how they make mistakes, and how politicians make mistakes. So that is, at the liberal economy that we're living in at the moment is broken down many times. Everything fails. Whatever one, prime minister, whatever the government tries to do, it fails. It's very interesting. It's a bit like a folk opera in a sense. To me, when I read the news, I think, oh, what's going to happen now? Oh, it's interesting, isn't it? Somebody's going to say something about the refugees, and then something about to say something about Russia or China, and what they're saying is completely stupid. Whatever they don't see the reality of what it is to be human. And I came across an interesting remark of a journalist actually who said, the trouble with the gross national product is that the gross national product means everybody contributes to the wealth of the country. But they're unhappy. They're in their jobs. Vast numbers of people don't like their jobs. They do it because it makes a living, that's all. So it makes a living, but they're unhappy. So when they go on holiday or retire or something, that's over. So, I'm probably overstepping my mark because people are good at heart, aren't they? I mean, the people are very, very nice and good. But really, they're in the wrong job. Mostly. Not you. He's the editor of the paper. Anyway, so what sort of job do you do?
I'm an engineer.
A what?
An engineer.
Engineer?
Yes.
That sounds promising, doesn't it? You like it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So you're in a job that you like, you're passionate about. Yeah, that's great. So some people are not in a job they like. That they last. I mean, it's wrong of me to say, a lot of people are in jobs that they hate. And they're only doing it because it brings in a wage, and that's the only thing that matters to them. And so they do the job, they don't go to art galleries, they don't listen to music, probably. That's what Latour talks about all the time. The failure of a civilization to manage itself properly. Not only manage itself, but manage the earth. So there are two things, the earth and people, humanity and the earth. And humanity is failing the earth.
Nevertheless, I do find it interesting that humanity thinks itself so good that it's in charge of the planet rather than the fact that the planet's probably in charge of it. If the planet doesn't want us.
Yeah.
The planet would
And,
go on.
and the planet would be regardless.
Would be extinct.
Little Lingula, which we use as a dating fossil in archaeology, that was there hundreds of millions, probably billions of years ago, will still survive even if we, rather than the planet, decides to have a nuclear winter.
Oh, if we blow ourselves
in the
up.
next week or two.
I mean, if AI gets any control of things and blows the whole earth up, something
we
will
don't need
live.
AI to do that.
Something will live somewhere. You know, some little ant or worm will live. Something will hide in all the mess that's going on. Like after the dinosaurs gone, you know, something happened
Can
after millions of years.
Can I just try something on you that happens to me quite frequently? I've got a couple of very, very good friends. One is a gate on the Roman road to down the Cliver Valley, which goes down to Dorward. I don't know how long the gate's been there, but I made friends with it when I was working at a climbing centre nearby in the 1960s. And what is very special about this gate, and what I realised about the gate, is the intellect of the craftsman that made it. And that is because whenever you go through the gate, it closes itself. And as long as I've known my friend the gate, and whenever I return to see the gate, it always opens and it always closes without fail. And it's worked, you know, I've known it. When did I last see it? I probably last saw it about 10 years ago, and I probably first came across it in 1967. And the reason is from one very simple mechanism, is that there's a string and a weight. And when you open the gate, it pulls the string and the weight. Now, how simple is that? And that's kept that gate alive, you know, as long as I've known it. I don't know when it was a very old gate when I knew it. And the other one is, well, I think about one of my kayaks, which I don't use anymore. But my shed is a similar one, which was made by a friend of mine who's now dead. And you'll appreciate this. Every time I'm doing a repair or something on that shed, I become very aware of how well the guy has done it in the first place. And what a superb, very casual, I mean, he built it as a big shed, really. The interesting thing about the life of the construction of these agricultural buildings, it's timber frame, plywood, and a bit of cement render. There's sort of now houses in the millions in St Ives, you know, as you go up to the Cornish Arms, that were actually built in the same way. Just a couple of breeze blocks at ground level, then a timber frame, then some insulating in between the two walls, plasterboard on the inside, whatever they call it, way rock, it's sort of called, it's got initials now on the outside, and the cement mat rendering. You know, you would swear it was a breeze block wall, but it's not. The only good thing about that is that maybe in the future people won't value them as some of our properly constructed buildings when they come to tear them down. But humanity being what it is, maybe they will be fighting to keep down things up. But it's that the way that a craftsman, and the same as an artist or a painting, the way the spirit of the way a job is done can be transmitted through that in the same way. So that's more about things having their own spiritual existence, I suppose, rather than living. But there was, I forget the name, maybe Diallo knows. He's a student of philosophy. There was one of the, I think he was one of the Enlightenment philosophers, that said that rock was the lowest form of life, which I thought was quite interesting. But when I read that not all that long ago, I remember that a friend of mine in my early climbing days once wrote about the experience of the rock, how a rock would experience a climber. So interesting, yeah. I know where you're coming from.
No, I know a few rock climbers who feel the same about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
Thank you.